Hi guys, and welcome back. In this lesson we're going to draw the first character, Rey from Star Wars. We'll start with the sketch and then we'll go into more detail. So first we'll draw the action lines. We need to block the torso, the pelvis and the limbs in whatever pose we're going to use. As you see, I have one arm bent and the other stretched, with the head looking to one side. I've also given her a light contrapposto on the legs to add more movement. On top of this, we can sketch the clothes. This way we have an idea of how the character is going to look in the end. It's easier to sketch the clothes on top, like I'm doing, than sketching it after we applied all the anatomy. This, of course, if you have a rough idea of the anatomy. If you don't, then it might be best to draw that first. You can draw some of the details like the staff, the hair, the face. Just complete the character a little bit more. If it's difficult for you to work without a sketch, then you can download these 3 sketches I placed in the attachments section for you. You can use these if you like to work on top of. Let's select the first drawing and take it to a new file. In this file, press Ctrl-T to transform, and we'll scale the drawing to the size that you need. Lower the opacity of the layer in the menu on the right. The brush I'm using is number 36 with some adjustments. You can see the properties here if you want to use the same brush. You could also use your own brushes by making them from scratch or downloading them online, whatever you prefer. I'm going to set the brush to 40%, this way the strokes are more like a pencil. I'll start by drawing light, loose strokes. And what we're doing at the moment is drawing the clothes. Just use basic shapes, well, as basic as you can. You can draw the main creases. You don't need to focus much on the details for now. However, you do need to pay attention to the volume. Every element has its own volume and space. We can't draw things stuck to the body unless the material is something like lycra, for example. So we need everything to have its own space so the character can breathe. If you draw a stroke that you need to rectify or you make a mistake, just press Ctrl-Z to undo. If you use Ctrl-Z with Alt, you'll keep going back until the program lets you. Another way of deleting something is using the eraser tool with the E shortcut. For creases like on the arm, draw random lines so you can then select the lines you like best in the next stage. Sometimes it's nice to draw these random lines going in the direction of the arm. Then you can see which ones you like the best. I'll carry on with the face. As I said before, I'm not making an exact copy of the character's face, I'm interpreting it in my own style with the features that I want. It might not look like the character we based it on, but that's not important to me. It's not what I'm looking for. I want it to be inspired by this character, mainly for the clothing and the hair, things that distinguish and characterize this person. I'm not so sure about the jaw. So I'm going to erase all the area of the jaw and the mouth, and I'll correct it, taking it back a little bit. This way I think it's more balanced. As the creases of this arm are much larger, I'm going to make random lines that are wider, like the other arm. Let's copy the same technique, just using more lines, as now there is much more material that covers this arm, and we need it to have more volume. I'm going to draw the staff very simply. I don't really need to go into every tiny detail on it, as that would be quite complicated, and we're not doing a very detailed drawing. So I'll simply draw some lines that more or less determine the structure of the staff, and we'll leave it there. I mean, you could add more detail if you want to, or leave it more minimal. You decide where to add the detail and where not to. Now select this layer, the one we had before as well, and we'll unite them. To do this, you need to right-click on the layers and merge the layers together. We'll carry on drawing on a new layer, and we'll now add much more detail to the drawing before we pass on to the ink stage. Try to go bit by bit and take your time when you're drawing this part. We want the details to look nice and neat. And this is important because later, when we do the line art, we'll be drawing on top of this. This is our base. You can add more lines if you want to when you ink, but we'll mainly be using this as a base. So any detail we have in this drawing will help us in the next stage. To draw the lines in the hair, I like to again draw random lines that go from the tension point at the top of the head right down to the ponytail. This way we get those lines when we're wearing a ponytail or a bun. This, of course, if you have long hair. Then in the line art stage, you can select the lines you like best. So I'll just speed through this part where I'm drawing. With the lasso tool, I'll select the head and I can transform it with Ctrl-T. This way I can make it bigger, as you saw before. This is a trick you can use when there's an element in your drawing you want to change the size or direction of. With the transform tool and the lasso tool, we can do lots of great things. When you draw the creases on the arm, select the ones you like the most, but just make sure that they start from an interesting point. When we're done, we can join the sketch layers again and create a new one where we're going to do the line art for our character. Lower the opacity and we can start. The opacity on our brush, though, we'll have at 100% so the ink looks perfect. I'm going to use the same brush that I used before because I like that kind of broken stroke that we get from it. But of course you can use any brush that you like. It all depends on your personal taste and style. Now this part is very important. Take care of the thickness of the line. I like to use a thicker line on the outside and the parts that stick out, and a slightly thinner line for the inner parts. Now this is just an aesthetic choice, but you can do it differently if you like. There are lots of illustrators that do it this way. It kind of looks like a sticker or a cutout. If I make the outside lines thicker, then you can understand the volume much better. But these are just simple tricks that give you interesting results. There are artists that ink the whole drawing in the same way, the same thickness, and you could do it that way too. It's really up to you. Just experiment and find your own style. Once this is finished, we can move on to the colour. Create a layer underneath the ink layer and lock this one. Select the colour you want for the base and use this to paint the whole figure as if it were a silhouette. Paint gradually and take care of the edges. This is important. We need the colour to cover everything perfectly. Literally like a mask. because later on we're going to subordinate all the layers so that the colours won't come out of the edges. So be careful and very patient in this process. When we finish with the base colour, we're going to create different layers which will paint in different colours. Select a colour to contrast and start painting the fabric. For example, paint everything that's going to be in this colour. You need to subordinate this layer to the one below. You can do this by selecting the layer, pressing Alt, and clicking on the layer on top of the base layer. And this way we won't go out of the edges that we created. Now we need to paint the inner edges very carefully because there are some areas that contrast with other colours. The layers you make below this one are going to be covered by this colour, so you won't have to worry about if the colour is going to go out or not, because you won't be able to see it. It's enclosed by the base layer, so this is a good trick to use. When we make a layer underneath one that's already subordinated to another, then that one is automatically subordinated. If you make it on top, then you'll need to use the same technique we used before, which was Alt and clicking on the layer you're going to work on. When choosing colours, try to choose colours that contrast with one another. So if it was white and black, we'd see it as a grayscale with contrast. We need each element to be seen separately, and this is very important when we're choosing colours. Another important thing to remember is that all the colours should be in the same colour range, or approximately. We need a balance. If we used an intense red or green, then that might not look so good, unless it was our intention to make such a bold contrast. And in this case, that's not what we're looking for. We want a balanced colour range. If we used greys, if we used ochre, whatever we use, we still need to keep the same colour range. So now that we have the character painted, we're going to create a gradient. Select the base layer, pressing Ctrl on the layer, and then select the gradient tool. You can find it clicking on the paint bucket tool, and it's the second option. On this layer, select a darker colour and then add lines upwards or downwards, whatever you find interesting. I usually use a darker colour than the one I have. Now let's create a shadow layer, and we'll set that to multiply. Select a purple tone, and we're going to use that to paint on top of the character. You might think the purple is quite intense, but it doesn't matter. We can lower the opacity of the layer. Purple is the perfect colour for shading because it contrasts well with the skin tone and in general with other colours. It doesn't matter what kind of drawing you're going to do, purple is always a good choice. You could try with other colours if you want to experiment. If you need to correct anything, you can use the eraser tool to select the areas of shadow you don't like, and vice versa. Take the eraser, erase what you don't like, and then create the shape again. With Ctrl U, we can adjust the tone of the shadow a little just to try it out. Now we'll create a light layer. We'll set that to hard light and choose a pale yellow. Try to make sure it's not too saturated. Now I'm going to add some specific points of light, like this. If you think it's too intense, you can lower the opacity of the layer later. Don't worry. And with that, our character is finished. In the next lesson, we'll paint another 2 heroes, but we'll speed through as you now understand the process. There'll be a few differences between one drawing and another. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next lesson.